after that. So, Suzanne, if I might be able to begin with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Buro Mekini, Kumbi Ningi, Gachu Gaya, Namala, Yono Naubo, Kumbi Ningi. I say it is a good day today in my language, and we will walk and talk together on country. But I connect to my father's mother's country on my matriarchal lineage. And so Suzanne Thompson, I'm the First Nations member for the Emissions Reductions Assurance Committee for Australia, ERAC, the newly inaugural position that was created through the Chubb Review for carbon markets, as well as a director of the Indigenous Carbon Industry Network and founding member of the Yumbaka Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Tourism Development Corporation, Yatchadak in Central Queensland, delivering a HIR carbon project. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bianca McNear. Hey, thank you. I'm a Marlgana woman from Kathaguru, or otherwise known as Shark Bay in Western Australia. Very passionate about leading Aboriginal women projects on country, supporting Aboriginal women to fulfil their ancestral responsibilities by caring for country and caring for each other and caring for community. Thank you.
Jingiwala everyone, my name is Larissa Baldwin Roberts. I'm a Widjabul Waiba woman and I head up an organisation called GetUp. I also co-founded an organisation called Common Threads, which is a hub for, advocacy across Australia. And I also I lead research on passing the message, which is looking at how we persuade the general public in Australia to basically support Indigenous solutions and campaigns.
Yam everyone, I'm Polly Cutmore. I'm from Moree with connections to Teriai and Mangandai, with connections to the Anawan people up into the mountains. I represent the Gamaroi elder people of Moree with connections to the Miai, Guida and McIntyre rivers and the Great Artesian Basin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Suzanne, we're just going to show a short video of some work that you're doing on your country. I just wondered, do you mind just giving us a short introduction to this?
Yeah, 100%. So 4 years ago, we walked back onto country and acquired through the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation a property called Gracevale Station. We were still in the centennial, I suppose, drought of 8 years, so the country was quite barren. The property owner previous to that had cleared it and annihilated the whole of the country and run cattle on it. And so for us then it was about hydrating but also reawakening our ceremonies, and part of that practice is what we call our rainmaking ceremonies, but also the understanding of how to care for country. And so we embarked on cleaning a waterhole out and removed 2.5 metres of built up silt. And because that particular waterhole we cleaned out was the first water catchment that flows into Lake Eyre, so of our part in Ningi country and the significance of our responsibility to mobs downstream. So it's the dry Alice table, and of course then part of the process was then going and we replanted grasses and stuff and weird along the creek line and watered it, released 1,000 litres in the morning, 1,000 litres of an afternoon, and did that for 8 days until we held water in the bottom. And of course, once we held water, the next morning a koala had appeared. But each day we were able to monitor the new animal prints that were, I suppose, introducing them back into the water hole that was dry. So this is a project, or in what we call Napachi, which is you give, we give. And so if we give to country, country gives back to us. So it's our way of giving back to country. So Napachi. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
We got no sound. Good old technology. The gentleman up behind me here is Uncle Vincent Forrester. He's head lawman from Uluru, Mutijula. And so one of the things that we ensure that we do is we do it right way through our law and our customs and practices. And so for myself, playing a matriarch and learning the importance of women being boss of country and what our true role is in guiding this. So this particular project, I was told I was boss and I could tell them what they needed to do. So this is what we did. And hopefully we might just keep going when he gets it, I think, Jace, hey, or something. You don't want to delay.
I think we might. Shall we just continue with the discussion? Try it again.
Can you start again? You can find it on YouTube, Yachadak.
This year, NAIDOC theme, caring for country. But what does it mean, caring for country? If all you blackfellas out there in your country, you say you're blackfella, go and identify a rock hole that you clean out, help that environment a little bit. Because you're caring for country, you're caring for the animal too, eh?
You call that napachi.
Ngabaji.
Napachi.
You give me, I'll give you. Well, these young men, they came to a place called Gracevale Station and they helped maintain a rock hole. Never make fire inside the rock hole.
Yeah.
You make it out.
Okay.
About 80 months ago, traditional owners belonging in this country, they cleaned out that rock hole and the country started talking to us straight away.
Oh, oh. It's very grounding. You know, it shows that, wait a second, this is actually something that can make a difference, not only in our neighbour's country, but also in our own country and also in your own country, wherever you're from. Even in the last few days that we've been putting water in this water hole, we've seen more animals come by here. I've never felt closer to country than I have in the last couple of weeks. It's amazing.
This experience has taught me the value of caring for country, the real value of why you should care for country as not only just an Indigenous person, but anybody that lives in this country, because it's a collective thought amongst us all, that we all have a sacred place that connects us through the water. Water travels all around this country, all around this continent. So, it's what brings us all together.
Waterhole like your heart, and your heart's got to beat. And then the waterways and the way they go out and across the country are the veins and the arteries that feed this living organism that's out there that feeds us. And so if our heart is clogged up and dried up and silted up and can't breathe the water, and the veins can't breathe, so country's sick.
Big country. So could you imagine if each mob cleaned out one rock hole? Sacred site is a garden, your place of worship. That's where you got to look after it. Ngapachi.
Napachi. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne,
This year,
if I can just follow up with you after that video, the one thing that really I got from it was the absence of government and non-Indigenous organisations it really looked to me to be like a genuine community, mob-led initiative. Can I just get you to talk a little bit more about how the idea came along and what drove it for you?
Yeah, 100%. I suppose, firstly, one of the things that we as Iningo people are very lucky and privileged to be custodians of our whole Seven Sisters law story, which is etched over 200 metres. And we are the coastline of the ancient inland sea. So just to put things into what our responsibility is, but then what is it that we care for country and how do we care and heal country? So, of course, as we arrived on country, and I remembered sitting there the first night and one of my cousins said, "Shh, can you hear it?" And we said, "What's that?" He said, "No white fella here to tell us that we've got to go now. It's our place." So I think that started to set that true sense of self-determination and defining exactly what it is we were doing when it came to caring for country and immersing ourselves through our lens and having the freedom to do that. And I think not just the curiosity, but to reawaken what we knew, what was sitting inside us. So, you know, who would have thought to clean a water hole out would be so impactful and to remove that? But then the importance of that, because our animals and our plants and the things that we need, the things that we're taught through our law and what our responsibilities are as Indigenous people is to provide that for our future generations. So I think for us then it was. And one of the things I think I'm really proud of is the 4 years of not having any grass or trees in paddocks to now I have 4-metre high trees and so much pasture that where I live is the deep south in central Queensland and they all fly over in their helicopters, curious of why I've still got green paddocks and why we've increased our herd numbers from 250 to now 405.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to just keep going with that theme around caring for country at the moment, and just Bianca, if I can just ask you some of the work that you've been doing in Shark Bay, particularly around oceans and how you have adopted your leadership approaches with your mob around that work.
Yeah, thanks, Jazz. In my country, in Shark Bay, we have one of the biggest populations of loggerhead turtles, one of the biggest nesting sites in the world. And Boyungara, we call turtle, is very important to our women. Our women are responsible in my country for life, and men are responsible for the death. And both are very important process for us. And so it's really important, you know, there's a lot of colonisation has come in that has meant that men have had to take some leadership roles, a lot of leadership roles, but now our women have had to stand up, stand forward and really step forward because of the healing that our country needs. So in my country, I started pulling together Mulgana women to do a loggerhead turtle monitoring program with the local state government. But we're able to go up there and take a whole week to ourselves, go up there, do the monitoring of the Boyungara, of the turtle, and spend time with each other and teach each other and pass on those women's business things. We take our young teenage daughters out with us at a very important time in their life, and we talk about fertility, we talk about responsibility, and we talk about connection to country. We go to the place where our ancestors come from, a place that as women we don't get to go to often because we don't have the boats, we don't have the fishing licenses. But for this trip we get to actually go out there and reconnect with our great-grandmothers. And it's very much a connection to a grandmother to a granddaughter connection that we're able to enhance throughout this experience. And in our group we don't have any leaders in our team. We're a team. Some of us are better at other things. Obviously, I'm the one who likes to talk up in front of people, so here I am. But when we go out on country, we don't have one leader. We have people that do all those things, and we come together and we work together on our, and put forward our best skills and work out who can work at that situation at that time. And we're all very inclusive of each other. And before we go, we have to go to all our grandmothers and all our nanas and aunties to get permission to go as well. So it's reconnecting that really strong matriarchal line within my community now. It's giving our women something that we can say that we know we can look after now, because in my country, we as women, we're not allowed to be around the harvesting of our buangara because of our responsibility to life. Now we were able to reconnect with the responsibility of caring for that nesting site for those loggerhead turtles. And growing up as a Mulgana woman and seeing my mum with darker skin being treated as less than me, myself as a little child, really stuck with me. And so that's really fueled my passion to make sure that Aboriginal women are seen for the knowledge that we hold, for the power of the carrying of the knowledge from our ancient ancestors, and being able to know how to pass that on to our children. And our children grow up through different stages of their lives where they get different things passed on to them. And now we're able to re-engage with that process and really bring our children into our country and into those old ancient practices that have carried us through to today.
Thanks, Meg. Auntie Polly, if I can just jump to you for a moment. You're working on a sort of a kind of a different side of the spectrum where you're really fighting for the protection of your country.
Yes.
Particularly from threats of mining and having to navigate those challenges around, some division in community around what decisions to make. Can I just get you to talk about some of those challenges that you experience in?
Yeah, one of the decisions, what's been going on in my country is that I come from where it's dry, but we have the great artesian water, and that's our groundwater that's underneath. But we have two rivers that are going close to my town of Moree, the Miai River and the Guida. And they've been under siege since the 70s, and that's come from the cotton first, the agriculture area. They have taken more water out of our rivers than what that should have, and dammed them all around. With our great artesian, that's been under siege from the mining companies because we have Santos that wants to pour the poison back into that great artesian, our underground water, but we also have them using our riverways to put wastewater through too. So at this stage, we are trying to protect our waters. And the other thing that's happened within our waterways in Moree is that the Commonwealth government has privatised our water, so now it's on the market. And we have to bring water back to our communities now because there's no water. In 2019, we had big, large fish kills that was lapping down further our riverways as far as Menindee, Burke and Brewarrina, where that was getting poisoned from the mining companies with their explosive stuff that was being washed off into the waters, getting into the fish gills. But one of the things is, of course, we are a dry area in Moree. Water is very special, but also sacred to us. And like our underground water is the thing that sustains us through floods, through dryness and everything like that. But we are protecting it now against the mining companies that are coming in and trying to poison that. So have a lot of work to do, but we're all coming together to protect our waterways because we have to send clean water down to our people further down south as far as Adelaide. I come from the Murray-Darling Basin, which is connected up to the top, goes into Queensland, runs right through New South Wales inland, down to South Australia, Canberra, Victoria. And so that is what's under siege from the agriculture areas in our towns. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Auntie Polly. Larissa, I just wanted to take a slightly different tack or build on what we've just heard from our other panellists. And one of the things that really strikes me is that often in leadership we have to talk about creating space for women in leadership to be able to take lead roles, and yet what we're seeing here as an example, and also with the work you've done yourself, is women actually taking the lead, not waiting around to be asked. And I just wonder if you might be able to pick up and talk a bit more about what you're seeing in terms of the role that women are playing, the leadership role that women are playing in the climate movement.
Well, I think for Aboriginal women, one thing that I think the broader Australian public maybe forget or don't understand is that in a lot of cases our matriarchal lines are intact, and understanding what that means for culture and roles. So me as a Bundjalung woman, like, we are lawmakers and men are law enforcers, like, in our communities. And so what that means in the way that we advocate and who takes space, often there's a disconnect when we think about, I guess, patriarchal spaces, when we think about bureaucratic spaces, government spaces. We see a lot of men in these spaces, and often in reflection to, you know, having those systems as decision making, we see a lot more Indigenous men brought into spaces because they have different practices around law and culture, and there's a lot of story there. But the reality is, if that we want to particularly talk about climate change, talk about our communities and what they need, then you need to bring our women into these spaces. And so what I find so much, like, you know, I have the benefit to travel across the country and to work with so many people, is that just because work is seen to be unfunded in our communities, it doesn't mean it's not happening. There was a time when we weren't able to access health and legal services. Incredible work by our elders, lots of women, in order to build these services. And I guess, like, that space of, you could call it like entrepreneurship, but it's actually looking after community, playing our roles and creating those spaces when they didn't exist for us, has always been the role of Aboriginal women. So I think when it comes to climate, I don't see enough Aboriginal women in spaces. I don't see enough Aboriginal women who effectively have roles in communities. And I think, you know, it's one of the terms that get thrown around, like, people call us activists. And I think for Indigenous people, our role is what we do in our everyday life. It is beyond the role that we have in our paid job, the way that we show up in communities. So a lot of the work that we do is making sure that we're getting out on country and having conversations with people, you know, and I think that we make the mistake of, like, overthinking what it means to be an ally or to build relationships and that sort of stuff, and actually get out there and understand who is in community, who you do need to talk to. And I just find within this space is, like, there is so many incredible amounts of adaptation work, mitigation work that is happening from Indigenous people, particularly women. I'm just, like, going to keep saying that, but it's not visible in these spaces. It's not visible within the Australian climate movement. It's not visible when we're talking about, you know, the progressive movement and talking about climate on climate change. Like, I know there's a huge space for youth, and that's really important, but for Aboriginal people, I think our women are incredibly important to the solutions, but also the advocacy. If you think about the climate disasters that are happening, it's just one example of a story, but from the Kimberley, you took the Aboriginal Women's Centre up in the Fitzroy Crossing, the Koori Mail, which is largely driven by women in Lismore. Those are frontline services that actually provided emergency service for the entire community, incredibly run by women. Most of those organisations right next to the rivers that flooded them. But these are women that take responsibility for looking after country and for looking after communities, and have been in incredible fights with departments at a state level, at a federal level, trying to get reimbursement, because they did basically outlay funds because community came to them in order to, you know, house people, feed people when their houses were underwater. And so it's just, I think, an incredible role that we don't see. And I'm really passionate about making sure that there are more women in these spaces.
Fantastic, thank you. I just, if I may, I just want to pick up on a couple of issues around rights and responsibilities associated with leadership, and in particular talk about the right to self-determination. And one of the real challenges that we experience in leadership roles is that there are times when you have to be decision makers. But there are also times where, more importantly, you've also got to facilitate those decision-making and, in a sense, devolve that decision-making not just to an individual, but to the collective. And I just wonder if I can get you all to pick up on that theme and how it is that you manage that responsibility of bringing your people into those decision-making roles that you have to make with respect to your country, and particularly with respect to addressing climate change?
For me, one of the challenges is the dispossession, or if not the annihilation and the complete massacre of my people in central Queensland. And the challenge, firstly, to come home as a matriarch and take the role on as a matriarch. My father passed and was the last elder. That was a part of that in 2003. So returning home then and looking out and thinking to myself, hearing all the babies and my responsibility as a grandmother, because I'm in grandmother law time, and what does that mean as I'm trying to nation build and create the succession of the future? Because for us, we are at a point now where my generation is the last generation of two world walkers. And to understand how we finesse and continually bring that through, I think, is so important in understanding our leadership. I've found myself in a lot of lead roles, because then it's entrepreneurship, because it's actually how do we complement and blend the new way of thinking of our young people? How do I create magic for them to want to come home to country? And firstly, though, we make sure we set our rules of engagement, and they have to know that it's actually an honour to get to work on country and heal country, because you're immersing yourself through, and it's the excitement from that. But then from that, it's actually getting to witness those lead roles that we take and being brave. I was called putting the big girl knickers on when we have to find our space, and because the world is very much a lonely world when we walk in this lead role, and especially I'm finding in my role at ERAC, as the First Nations member, to have to approve, Australia's response to the emissions reductions, and what is that responsibility? But for me, my first responsibility is as a grandmother. So it's ensuring our young people understand when you take these lead roles on and you have this strong sense of your cultural identity of a law, then what is that and who are you and how? So how are we bringing up that next generation? Language is important, so we're doing a language project. Our bush foods and our medicines are really important. And how do you survive and understand that? How do we reawaken that DNA sensory experience in you, so when you're walking through country, you smell something, it triggers you, and you're remembering how do you understand the tracks and why we have this rock art that's depicted. How do we actually start to understand what our ancestors left us and who are we in the future? So I think we can colonise ourselves in that direction, but for me the most important thing in leading is leading through our cultural lens and reawakening that thing that's taken away from us. And because our leaders, and my granddaughter, who is as fair as they come with blue eyes, I need her to stand strong and proud as a young Aboriginal woman. So I need to nurture her father, my son. I need to nurture my other son. And we're involved with the Climate System Services and Indigenous knowledge systems, and we attended NESP's Indigenous gathering. And of course I got the opportunity to talk about when you're engaging with us and our inclusion in our participation as Indigenous people, then what it is that you must understand our system and our order. So I rely on the lawkeeper, the true lawkeeper who's gone through proper initiation of the highest order, to inform me of what I need to understand as a matriarch. And then we took my son along. So the three of us then went and attended, because that's how we have to engage. That is, I think, what we need to leave as our legacy, to reset how we did business when it came to governing our land of Australia. And I think that's what's missing for us is, and of course for me the challenge is that I have no old people left. I have no community left that have a desire to want to embrace, because they're challenged with the colonial systems and the Western structure of chasing the dollar, of ensuring that we have all of this. But at the end of the day, and I think if we didn't learn that through COVID, money meant nothing. We had to understand how to survive and sit together as people together. So those, I think, are those challenges for our leadership. So thanks, Jace.
Thank you. Bianca, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I think that's beautiful, Susan. I think I can follow on. That was lovely. In my country, we've had that lot of disconnect, and we have to find opportunities to reconnect because we see what's happening to our children. We see what's happening to our old people, and we know we need things to change. We live in a patriarchal governance framework. Even when it comes to native title, it's a patriarchal setup. So, you know, for us to make decisions, we don't go to the board meetings. We don't go to the hall where everyone has to sign the paper and to get in. We actually sit back with our people, with our daughters and with our children and with our nanas and aunties, and we talk about things. We try things. We don't even know if what we're doing is the right thing. We have to try things and wait and see if country tells us if it's the right thing. You know, we might not even know if what we're doing is going to hold something, but we have to try. And we know, you know, sometimes we don't know if the seagrass seedlings that we're teaching our kids to plant, if they will grow, but we have to plant them. We have to try. And it's a generational commitment. It's a commitment to our grandchildren's grandchildren. And that's the way we work as matriarchs. We come together, we talk to each other. We don't have one person at the front that's louder than everybody else. You know, that's really important to be able to bring that type of matriarchal governance back to our communities, be able to empower those women that have to decide what do we pass on to our children, what do our children need to have to grow up in a healthy country and a healthy world. Because we know if our country's sick, we're sick too. So being able to reconnect and heal country is healing each other. And it's the beautiful uniqueness that Aboriginal women have where we can bring that healing. We can bring it as a holistic way. And when we say we care for country, that means we bring love. It's not just managing country, it's loving country. It's loving everything that's part of country. And so I think that's really, in my country, the big decisions and the big things that are going to change and go into our future are not made in big places. They're made by the little fish in the big ocean, not by the big fish in the little ponds. And that's the way we work in Shark Bay, and making sure that when we come forward, we're coming forward because everybody is with us.
Melissa?
I think on self-determination, I think we agree on this. Self-determination is not something that you can be given. It's an action. It's something that you do every day in the way that you live, in the way that your presence and how you walk in this space for me, as an Aboriginal woman. I think I am in a world where people expect for strategies to be written down on paper and to show like how you're going to basically change the world, and there's a proposal and there's a budget and there's everything. And I've always fought against, like, that is important, but for me, it's really important to sit down with the people that I'm working with to co-create those strategies. And I think sometimes we sit in spaces as people, as experts, and think that, you know, people who are local out on the ground may not have, you know, my dad he left school in year 4. He's the most educated man on native title. He knew ins and outs, every lawyer that you could think of in this country, and could scheme any strategy. And it was incredible. Like, we've got one of the largest settlements in New South Wales history from our native title because of him and our Uncle Reg and the work that they did and the way that they approached that. But there's incredible work happening in these spaces, and the skills and the strategies that is on the ground is so undervalued and underutilised. And I think we often... I know this is what happens a lot in federal government spaces, but we see something working over here for one Aboriginal community, and therefore we roll it out into a blanket solution across the rest of the country, not understanding the diversity that exists across this country. And so for me, we really see the work that we do in campaigning, in lobbying, is really like facilitating how do we get owners of country in decision-making rooms with people who think they're making decisions on people's country. And I often get asked, like, you know, we have over 14 communities that are engaged in the fracking campaign in the territory. People are like, how do you get all this mob to work on an anti-mining campaign? I'm like, we didn't go out talking about anti-mining. We had a big meeting in Borroloola over 10 years ago where we talked about what economic development looked like in the community, how people were experiencing climate change, and whether people were benefiting off the promise of mining that was sold to us 20 years ago. And the reality was no, that had cultural heritage, like their rivers were rediverted by Glencore at the time, pollution in their rivers, people getting really sick, and also they're still living in housing that was from, you know, Cyclone Tracy, and people still living in basically shipping containers with dirt floors. And that's still the reality in a lot of areas, not just in remote communities across Northern Australia, discrete communities in New South Wales. Like, the housing situation is incredibly dire. And so the work that we were doing was like, you can't just run an anti-mining campaign, you can't just run a climate campaign, you have to run holistic campaigns with community and commit to multiple years of being there. Like, we have worked on something like 6 elections, but the last time, just a couple of weeks ago, Jason and I were out in Borroloola, we had the minister out there announcing a dialysis service, $5 million dialysis service. And this is something the community has been campaigning for over 5 years. We went over to Mineary, 55 houses are being built in that community, and Auntie Naomi is standing there with us saying, we did this, right? And so there is a role of like, how do we work in collaboration? And I think we sometimes think about working with Aboriginal community, and there's this deficit idea around that our communities are complex. But I think you can flip the way that we think about complexity and how we think about intersectionally and how we think about issues holistically as well in our approaches, as in like just incredibly powerful. And actually this is what guides our solution. So yeah, you need to kind of flip the way that when blackfellas tell me ideas that they have, they're just like huge pie in the sky ideas. And sometimes I have the when I go up to a bunch of people, I'm like, this is the idea I have, and they're like, that sounds crazy. But the reality is we're talking about this whole system that we want to change, and the commitment that we have to actually move toward that change, I think is just second to none. So to me, self-determination is an action that is already happening. I would love for federal, territory, state governments, we have this, seen incredible benefit from having Indigenous procurement policies, where we make sure that Indigenous businesses are enabled to be the first ones that basically can take business on country. But what if Australian governments had a policy of self-determination, that is how they would act with communities? I think there would be such a change in the way that we participate, in the way that we build policy, and how successful that would be if we had that at a local level.
Well, my leadership came from when passing of my mother, and with that came all the responsibility of taking care of family, taking care of country, and making sure that we do the right thing. With that, my mother passed as sisters that are still there. So they have become my mothers now, and that's who I take my strength from and get my advice from, is from my elders in my community. They have been left out of the conversation from the early part. We were, where I come from, we were brought up on an Aboriginal mission, so we were contained in a space. I was born in an black part of the hospital in Moree, went to a black school in Moree, so we've been very controlled up there. But now, with the passing of our elders, we have stepped up now, and we've passed on to the elders that we have left. We're getting information from them and allowing them, their voices to be heard, and to see what's right for country and what's right for us. Because they've been dealing with a lot of government agencies up there, from education, housing, everything else that we do on a day-to-day basis, but not our environment. We've been left out of our environment because we've been in a small little town, so we have all the irrigators, agriculture areas and things like that that's come in and has taken control. But now we are looking for advice back off our elders about where we should stand and what stand we should take. And one of the things that we are doing is bringing, their voices back to our communities, especially along our riverways, to protect our waterways. So one of the things that we're looking at is possibly getting our elder groups through the Murray-Darling Basin and all those, is to start looking back to country and seeing what we should be doing more there. So my way of working is working with the elders within the communities and making sure that their voices is being heard, and what is important to them being heard. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll just throw another general question, and I just want to preface it with a discussion around culture. We have our own cultural ways of leadership and representation among our mobs. But non-Indigenous peoples also have their own cultural ways around leadership as well. And I just wanted to ask you all to get a bit of insight into how each of you manage those tensions, and particularly in talking about some of the challenges that you face in negotiating with non-Indigenous stakeholders, governments, and trying to take that leadership role on behalf of your people.
I think for me, one of the things I know when I started in Iraq, and I was asked, of course, we're always asked to set up an Indigenous engagement structure, strategy, model. What does this look like? And so it was for me, it was 2 days after the referendum, so my world and my opinion of the world was very different. And it was about now, for me then, it was going into a whole nother spectrum of burring back and refusing to be a part of something that has now taken my people through the ultimate betrayal and denial of who we were and how we fit within this system, and how real are they when it comes to wanting to engage with us. So I sort of got that it's okay to be the first ever First Nations member for Iraq, yes, but you've got to approve, methods. I'm not a scientist. So firstly, the respect...
Sorry, Suzanne, do you mind if can I just ask you to explain what Iraq is?
The emissions... So Iraq's the Emissions Reductions Assurance Committee for Australia. And so holding the integrity standard of our emissions and also our abatement, but also approving of the methods. And so for me, it was about, well, if I'm going to do this, then let's be real and we need to go visit these sites. Let's do on-country visits. So, of course, the committee and Karen Hussey, our permanent chair, full-time chair, which is also a part of the Chubb reviews process. So both of our positions are key as far as Australia's responding to this. So then it was about then sitting and thinking, well, if I've been engaged for the last 40 odd years as an Indigenous person, nothing's happened and I've just come out of the referendum, whoa, this is going to be something interesting. So it was about flipping the dialogue. So I think it's about finding the courage to truly know who we are and having the courage to actually insist on the language and the way we want to be engaged. And so it was about establishing Australia's what I call inclusion action plan. Let's shift from not being engaged. Because engagement means you just have to sit next to me on a bus and ask me a question, and that would be engagement. So it was about let's be included in this conversation. Let's start to take action, and especially when it comes to climate response and our climate responsibility. And I suppose the aspiration to seek this knowledge from our ancient ancestors and for us who are part of the continuum of this knowledge that survived the many millennia and the many extinction periods in Australia that we survived through. So how do we actually... So that inclusion then meant that it's important that whilst we still have them walking this planet that are a part of the continuum that we talk about as Aboriginal people, of a law that we practice for many millennium, well, that is those people that have gone through initiation to the highest order, and they still walk this planet. And they need to be valued for that, because that is actually the knowledge that we are seeking, not from a PhD Indigenous student that's doing environmental management, with all respect, because that's still part of a Western construct. We are being asked for our cultural knowledge, and our cultural knowledge must be engaged, included, and set up in such a way. So, of course, then, being brave enough to then insist that we actually establish Australia's Cultural Knowledge Law Council. Because none of us should move or even attempt to seek any sort of resolve when it comes to this unless we place them back. Now, they're dying. They're in their 70s and 80s now. We have a very small window to ensure that we have this opportunity to seek this ancient knowledge of this continuum that we talk about. Not something when we hear we're 60,000 years, country needs people, people need country, and we hear all this stuff. It is a lot more than that. and it goes a lot deeper than that, and it gives us a sense of the freedom and I suppose the celebration to know that you can actually go and clean a water hole out. You can actually get in a posi track and you can remove 2.5 metres of built up silt. You can plant grasses back around and go back and water it. You actually can do that. You can actually look after your burial grounds. You can actually look after all of your sacred country. And the other thing that we've been doing in that space of being brave enough to set best practice for the balance of the two worlds, the two world walking, is that we pick up sticks. Because when we read the records, and I think Dark Emu talked about Mitchell, you know, and they had this vision of this beautiful parkland that Australia was, and these rolling hills, and it was so well managed. Well, it doesn't look like that now, but it will look like that if we are given permission and trusted, because trust is the most important thing. But we have been betrayed, and we constantly get betrayed in this space, so it's about building that trust. Trust us to lead you, because we are actually willing to do this for humanity. That is our role as Aboriginal people in Australia, is for humanity, and that is what our ancients left for us in our Dreamtime stories to continually pass down to share. Thank you.
In my country, in Shark Bay, when we do our turtle monitoring, we learn while we're there. There's a moment where we take a breath in our first trip, and you know, we're sitting there in the pitch black dark, you know, we're most westerly point of Australia. There's no lights, there's no towns around us, and all we see is this dome of stars over us. And you know, we get time to stop and watch these big girls go back into the ocean, you know, after they've travelled so far, and there's so much we don't know about them. They've travelled so far, they've come onto they've dragged themselves up onto the beach, and they've laid these eggs, and then they've gone again. And when we see them big girls go back into the ocean, we feel like we're the little turtle eggs left on the beach. You know, we're left there on our own to find our way. You know, and those little turtles, they always find their way. They always come back to where they were born. And that gives us hope that as women, we're always connected to our ancestors. They're always there watching over us. They're always teaching us. They've given us everything that we need to come back to them and to be with them and to know where we come from. And so that's something that we always remember as women when we go turtle monitoring. And when we have to come into spaces like this, you know, we walk proudly through the doors that our ancestors opened for us. And this is a space that our ancestors have opened for us now. And we know this because that ancient connection is still there. We stand here and honoured to be here with that ancestral connection that goes all the way through. And it will go all the way further too, because when we see our children, they are our old people at the same time. And that is how our dreaming works. It's a circular motion. The children are our old people, the old people are our children, you know, and we live together and we learn from each other. So when we come into spaces that are really hard and really heavy, we know we have that ancient strength and ancestral teaching that is always going to be part of us.
I think for me, I think about... My dad used to say this thing like that Aboriginal culture was privilege and information. You had to prove that you were worthy to be given it. And so much of the work that we do is Aboriginal people don't have to play every role, but you have to play your role, and you have to play the role that you're given. And so for me, I see myself as, in these spaces particularly, is my job is to bring other people into this space. Like if I have the privilege of being able to be indoors because of the roles, because of I'm here literally because a bunch of elders pushed me into this role, and you know, said that there's an opportunity here for an Aboriginal woman to be leading a political organisation the size of GetUp in Australia, and there is an opportunity there. But the reality is in climate spaces, we're often talking about kind of tick boxes around Indigenous participation. Like, yes, there's an Aboriginal person on the panel, but for me, I think the role that I play is always advocating for a rights-based approach. If we don't see significant reform, whether we're talking about, you know, the climate crisis as it stands, we need to talk about, people talk about closing the gap, all those types of measures. But if we're not serious about regime change on native title, and so our communities have the ability to articulate what economic development means for us and what the future of work means for us, it doesn't look like a 9 to 5 everywhere else in remote and regional areas, and that's okay. But also, you know, when we think about ranger programs, like, you know, on the bushfires, we've seen this incredible conversation around fire management and the role of land management. And then when I talk to the climate movement, they're like, we want fire stick burning. I'm like, if you don't understand the holistic approach of land management, please don't just reduce it to just fire stick burning, because it is so much more holistic. Like, we need to see Aboriginal rangers in this country in the same way that we look at lifesavers, in the same way we look at the state emergency services as the people on country who are making it safe for everybody to live in this country, because that's the role that we've always played. And that means that we need to talk about actual transitioning back, you know, parks and those places into Indigenous protected areas, because that's the way it should be, and that's what we need to go forward to manage this country. So it's not just that. There's a lot of unfinished business in this country. When we talk about cultural heritage rights, when we talk about protection of water, you know, there's incredible work that's being done in Indigenous nations all over the world, looking at the rights of water systems as people and that sort of stuff. And we really have a fight on our hands in this country to acknowledge water systems. But if we don't have Indigenous women, or Aboriginal women who speak for so many waterways across this country, we're never going to see those rights recognised, and we're never going to see that protection recognised. You know, there are so many communities in Australia that are running out of water, and that is the reality of the country that we're living in. There's an incredible explosion around supporting Indigenous businesses, but if collective intellectual property rights are not recognised in this country, then who does this information belong to? Does it belong to the corporation? Does it belong to the government? So there is incredible collective rights that need to be recognised in this country, and we are nowhere near getting them recognised. You know, we're seeing in Queensland, the LNP government's coming in saying they're going to walk back the pathway to treaty, that they're going to defund it. Like, we need to find other pathways to run those processes, because we cannot be in a country that's dealing with climate change that is not talking treaty. We have to negotiate treaties in this country. And that's the approach that we need to hold on to as well.
Yeah. With us, with culture, we've got to also acknowledge what we're coming out of. And that's the colonial drunken coma in Australia that's been suppressing us for, you know, since they arrived. So now what we've got to do is take control back of our culture, and we've been producing our own reports in our country to let them know what they have been giving us through their government agencies and all that. It's all lies, we know that, especially with our culture and the way we are as a people. So especially with the mining companies that's come into, you know, they've also produced a lot of their own documentations about us and who we are and what we've done. So we've taken control of that. We produced our own in Moree regarding the Santos stuff in the Pilliga, to tell them about our cultural heritage. We know what it is, they don't. So we do our own now, and we're going to be starting to stand up and do that and produce our own stuff. We're not going to listen to them and what they're telling us about us. So remember that, what we're coming out of and what they have been doing. We're coming out of their colonial coma. So that's it.
Thank you, Auntie Polly. Look, we're just about to run out of time, but I do have one final question that I would like to put to each of our panellists, just to get a quick response from each of you, from your experiences. What is it that we can do to enhance our leadership capacity, and what are some of the things that you think others might be able to do to help support us in that? If I can just get a quick response to that from each of you. Sorry.
We'll try a quick response. What is it you... firstly, respect us. Respect goes a long way, and trust us. Trust us. That's all we say. And I think also help stand beside us because of what we're faced with, and especially where I live in Queensland, we're losing everything because yesterday that new government decided to drop our flags out of the parliament. So, and we had our Truth-Telling Commission, we had our Treaty Commission gone. So those are the things I think for us. What is it that you can do for us? Stand with us. Lead in that, because we're tired. We can't do this fight anymore. But what we will do when it gets to a point, if we are not respected as the oldest continual culture on the planet, not only by, I think, the world, but Australia, we will zip up, because we know we are okay because our ancestors have looked after us for many, many millennia through many extinction periods. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I think listening, deep listening, is where we need to start. Especially as women, you know, we have a lot of healing to do as well amongst ourselves, and being able to sit and listen to each other, but also to bring together what you can do for us is that deep listening. It really starts there. And we need to hear each other. We need to be able to have time to communicate and for you to actually hear what we're saying in your heart.
I think I go back to yarn with Yugambeh Elder Auntie Lilla Watson. She says this thing that we're talking about resistance. She said we're not the most resistant people, but because we get tired, we are the most persistent people. And I think there is a myth in the loss and the aftermath of the referendum that Indigenous advocacy or First Nations justice is not winnable. And I feel like you count us out at your own peril. Like, we are making plans to work out how we do the inquiry in Queensland by ourselves, and we will get there, and we will get more leadership in this space. Like, if we are to have a COP in Australia, we want to see hundreds of Indigenous leaders leading that space, because we are doing the work, we are, you know, the adaptation work, and we're not just doing it for our own communities, we're doing it for, you know, my dad says this thing, he said this thing like, there is no word for visitor in our language. So everyone that is here is participating in our country, and you need us to lead, and we are here to lead. So I think it's going to be an incredible thing to witness, seeing so much Indigenous leadership if we are successful at getting the COP. I'm manifesting that we're getting it, so.
I just think back, because we are the oldest. Just take time to get to know us, you know, and listen to us, but also embrace us a bit more, because we are here to embrace all of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our discussion for today. Can I firstly thank you all for joining us. It was wonderful to have you here listening to these amazing women talk about leadership, and can I ask you to join me in a round of applause for some amazing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.